Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining this month's Fireside Chat. This time is also co-hosted by CEED Concordia. My name is Kirolis Riyad, and I lead the Waste Not, Want Not initiative at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. With that, I am honored to introduce Camina Harrison-Chery, who is a culture programmer and entrepreneur of Haitian descent. Camina is a communication coordinator for CEED Concordia, advancing African perspective and youth leadership on campus. She's the founder of BIPOC, pop-ups geared towards supporting Black, Indigenous, and people of color youth-run or businesses, and owner of Urban Grabber, which is a head wrap brand dedicated to positive representation of Black women and Black joy. She facilitated youth-centered skill-building workshops on media production, employment, and entrepreneurship in Uganda, Benin, Bolivia, and Nicaragua. I am also honored to introduce Alexander Verbeek, who's a Dutch environmentalist, former diplomat, and a well-known speaker in humanitarian and geopolitical risk issues and the linkage to the Earth's accelerating environmental crisis, with a social media following of more than 390,000 people. He's a formal strategic policy advisor on global issues in the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He created the Planetary Security Initiative and is currently policy director at the Environmental and Development Resource Center in Brussels. So with that, I'd like to start. So today's Fireside Chat is about international collaboration in the fight against climate and waste crises. And I would like to start the conversation with a youth message that was delivered by Joshua Ampensim during January's Climate Adaptation Summit to heads of states, including our own Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I should mention that Joshua leads the Green Africa Youth Organization and is a formal guest in the Fireside Chat. So I will just start with that video.
Better. On behalf of our co-chair of the GCA, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and Feike Sijbesma, count us in.
Very good. Well, let's hear from a youth representative, Joshua Ampensim. What is your message to world leaders?
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I speak to you today on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of young people brought together by the GCA to produce a youth call to action. Because while we must continue to accelerate progress towards a net zero world, young people, especially young women, and those from indigenous communities are already feeling the impacts of climate change now. Our call to action shows we want to play our part in building a resilient future, but we need your support. Empower us through mandatory climate change education, and the MOOC is a brilliant opportunity to start with that. But we need this also in curriculums at the national level and also for informal young people to get their skills. Equip up with training for green jobs that focuses specifically on adaptation and finance us as we develop innovative solutions to adapt for our future. And very important, by the time I am at this age, sitting where you are as world leaders, it will be too late. And this is very critical. So right now, right here, your commitments will determine if the youth on the front lines become a climate migrant or a climate refugee, or they become a climate leader at the next extreme weather event. So please take action now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joshua, and thank you also.
So thank you both for joining me today. Alex, one of the lines that struck me from Joshua's message is that what governments choose to do today determines whether many of the young people become climate leaders or climate refugees. And you use the term planetary security often when you talk about the climate crisis, and I'm wondering what does that term mean, and also can you draw a line between international collaboration and solving that as a climate and planetary security in the context of the climate crisis?
Yeah, thank you. These were powerful words that Joshua just spoke. I mean, it's up to my generation to basically decide whether his generation will be a climate refugee or a climate leader. And so planetary security is. I started to use the word when I was working at Yale University in 2014. By that time, I had already for 10 years or so been involved in the debate about what people call climate security, how climate change will impact security. But I found that too narrow, basically because it is not just climate change that is changing in the world. Man-made climate change is part of the problem, but we also talk about biodiversity, the waste problem, pollution. It's about access to resources, it's about the food problems, it's about water problems, and all of that is, we're changing the conditions on this planet, and that will impact security. And the other thing is that climate security was always narrowly focused on international security, climate wars, countries getting trouble because the climate is changing, which is fair enough, that might happen. But you should also include the human security, because ultimately the first moment where you start to feel the impact of climate change, that is on the individual level, that is on the family level, and it is often the poorest people in the poorest countries that are the first one to feel that. So therefore, I changed the word. I spoke about planetary security, and then started an initiative which was done when I was back in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which are called the Planetary Security Initiative, and it was launched by our Minister of Foreign Affairs as an annual conference in the Peace Palace in The Hague, where the best experts in the world in this field came together. But more importantly, we brought them together with the policymakers and with military experts, so that they could learn from each other to better prepare and prevent and strategize about what was going to happen in the world.
Nice. Thank you, Alex. So, Camina, you've worked on the ground with in Uganda, Benin, Bolivia, and Nicaragua, and I'm wondering if you can paint a picture of the impact of both the waste and climate crisis that you might have witnessed there.
Definitely. So I think climate change manifests itself very differently in different countries, in different ways around the world. But there was definitely some things that united all these different countries together, especially on waste management and pollution, contamination of water. A lot of times, these are countries that are really big on exports of agricultural products. And so there's a lot of deforestation connected to that. And all these countries, anytime you have a condition of poverty, it'll only kind of greatly more affect the how people receive, how people are affected by climate change. And so all those different things that even though we have them here, they're amplified in any time you have conditions of poverty. And so I can speak specifically to my time in Uganda, since I was there the longest, and we have certain programs, internships actually in Uganda that tackle deforestation and waste management. We have a composting program where we go in different high schools and we have build awareness about composting. We build compost at different high schools and schools, especially in Gulu, where we're working. And so that, along with tree planting, we do a large marathon every year that kind of spreads seedlings around the community. And so when I was in Uganda, speaking specifically with Luke, which is one of my coworkers there in Uganda, talking about how climate change is not in a little bubble for each local community. Yes, it manifests itself maybe differently in certain communities, but that big problems of cutting down trees, whether it's for clearing land for agricultural use, that for use for local uses, but also for exporting, or whether it's contamination of water through mining or agricultural use as well. Also, plastics waste management's a big issue. Even me in my home country in Haiti, especially in cities that are growing very, very fast. You have people leaving the rural areas, going into larger cities. And so, managing waste and there's not the proper infrastructure is very difficult. And it makes me think specifically in my time actually in Bolivia, where I was working in El Alto, which is kind of in the altiplano of Bolivia. And so a lot of the surrounding kind of rural areas were flooding into El Alto, and the population was growing exponentially, but the infrastructure wasn't growing at the same time. And so I think you're seeing that kind of migration already up into more urban areas. And the problem it is in terms of getting the infrastructure and being prepared for that influx of people. And so in general, it was a lot of waste management, contamination, deforestation, but you see how it's connected to larger issues. A lot of, for example, our waste gets exported to different countries on the African continent and around the world. And so it's not even just local waste that people are dealing with, but waste internationally. And so you get to see that kind of firsthand through my work.
Yeah, I think the issue of waste exportation from rich countries like Canada and Western countries getting exported to Africa and Asia, also something that came up in that conversation with Joshua, because he was talking about how Ghana has one of the largest dump sites in the world because they deal with electronic waste and all these things that are just coming because of the consumption that happens here. All of these things are visible. Alex, I'm wondering what's your assessment in terms of international collaboration within the context of COVID, and what does that say in terms of our ability to address the waste and climate crisis as a global community?
Yeah, there's I think you can see the present crisis with COVID as a kind of test case for the global disaster that is awaiting us. That's already happening with climate change. There's quite a few parallels. I mean, it was predicted it was going to happen. We were able to prevent it had we taken the right measures, and I think in both cases internationally in the world we were not able to really imagine what a worldwide pandemic would actually mean. The difference, of course, is that the scale of this massive disaster that it is, we talk about millions of people dying, is just a fraction of what we're going to see with climate change if we don't take the right measures in time. So it's a warning. And the other thing is that the solution with the vaccines, etc., is happening relatively fast. So this is it's a massive global disaster, but it's a petri dish compared to climate change. It takes place only in a kind of 2-year period. For the rest of the world, I'm talking now about Western world, actually for the rest of the world, will take a few more years. After that, the virus will stay, but it will be much more under control, and it will be, one of the many problems we take care of, but not a major problem anymore. With climate change, we should learn lessons of what we have seen now in COVID. On the positive side, you can see how international collaboration and especially what innovation can do. Developing a vaccine in just, less than a year for a coronavirus for which we'd never in the history of mankind made any vaccine. Normally that would take like 10 years or so. We as mankind were able to do that within a year. So technology is always, also with climate change, the hopeful story. The bad story with climate change is often the leadership, the government, the lack of imagination, the lack of foresight and really planning. And I think all of these elements have been here as well. So I hope that the world will, once this pandemic is over, that we will take some time to come together and say, what are really the lessons learned? What can we achieve with better international cooperation, with setting better norms, holding each other to measure each other and do kind of peer review to how we are doing things, and also take lessons from the more positive things, like let's say the cooperation between the countries of the European Union. There's a lot of lessons to be learned there, how you can do things. So it's been a deadly, terrible test run for a rapidly changing planet. It's a man-made problem, most likely because it's just like climate change. Because if we are reducing biodiversity, if we're cutting down the forest, if we as humans are going to live in areas where we didn't live before, you put species together that would normally not meet, and that massively increases the chance for this to happen exactly as it was predicted. So now we know with climate change, we know what is going to come if we don't take action. So I hope it's a warning to take these kind of planetary challenges seriously. Work together, take action, be visionary, and it's one big plea for better leadership.
Yeah, no, that's it. So Camina, Canada is the largest generator of waste per capita in the world, and I have two quick. So what I'm wondering is that, given your international experience, what lessons should Canada be learning? I think there's a lot of talk about, like when you talk about poverty as sort of a magnifier of all the other problems. I think there's something to say about leapfrogging and helping people, helping countries to go through developments that they need to get out of poverty without repeating the mistakes of countries like Canada. But I'm also interested on the flip side of what it is that we can learn from the existing best practices in Africa, where waste generation is not as significant as it is here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it actually comes back to that. It's like questioning what is development, what is our notion of development, and what is our notion of things being efficient, and what consumption looks like. Like even just thinking about a day in Uganda, a simple day in the kitchen, for example. Like the chicken's running out back, the chicken gets killed, the chicken gets cooked. They're going to the local farmers market to get all the different like vegetables and fruits that you're putting in reusable bags. You're grabbing. It's mostly organic stuff as well. Things are bought in bulk. You get your rice, you put it in this big bag, and Tupperware. If you go to a restaurant, there's reusable plates. It's like all these little things, like even bottles you drink out of a bottle, you return it to the store. I think that sometimes it's depicted as like, oh, it's not developed because they don't have a system like ours where it's disposable plastic and you can get things very conveniently. But it's to me, I find it kind of funny that like here we'll talk about like things being organic and buying things, zero waste or in bulk, like, a bulk barn or whatever. And all these different concepts that seem like kind of revolutionary and very eco and green, but it's like, no, these are actually traditional ways that, indigenous peoples and, people have been living, and it's kind of just like the norm. And so I think that it's about questioning that, okay, what is our notion of like us being a developed country, quote unquote, when really we're going back to more like traditional ways of existing that we realize are more sustainable. And so I'm always confronted that when I travel and when I'm in Uganda, that like, it's incredible that things, maybe because they're not as developed, are actually just are more in harmony with the environment. It's a different way of consuming and a different way of living with the land. And so I think we can learn a lot about like questioning, like, do I need all these different things? Like even what in Uganda, like, you get a hole in a pair of pants, or even you get pants made by the local tailor, you get things repaired. And it's like these little habits that decrease waste that naturally, just because you want the lifespan of something to last longer, it makes sense intuitively. But here, our system's made that, you just throw the pants out in the waste and you buy more fast fashion. And so I think it's about actually, we can learn a lot from actually like, these other countries in terms of living, more harmoniously and actually wanting more out of our products, not just buying things that we like dispose of the next day, but wanting things to last. And maybe it's not because of a need to, like in other countries, but it's a choice to actively have things that, we're not just disposing of immediately.
I'm actually reflecting because I lived in Egypt for 17 years. I'm originally from Egypt. And when we buy Coca-Cola, it used to be in those glass bottles. Mm-hmm. Have like a quarter-pound deposit that, I drink my Coca-Cola, I finish it, I return the empty bottle and take a new one, and then I don't have to pay another deposit or whatever. It's only when I use the bottle, I have to pay another deposit. And it worked. Everything was fine. Like nobody felt that they're missing Coca-Cola. But it was, we didn't have that much plastic waste. And then in here, just you buy the plastic. Yeah, Alex.
I remember at a certain moment, I wrote on Twitter about a trip I made in America, a road trip. I was following the Colorado River from its source all the way down to the southwest. And every motel where I stayed, where they offer a breakfast in the morning, everything was throwaway plastic. And without an exception, not one night did I get a normal plate and a cup that somebody was washing. So I wrote about that on Twitter. And then there was a teacher of a school somewhere in America who very proudly wrote that, yes, I was worried about this too. And now I managed that all our throwaway plates and cups, etc., they are all compostable. And so they're made from paper or whatever. And then I said, well, yeah, I applaud that you do that. That is much better than plastic. But why not do like the rest of the world, that you just have plates and cups and afterwards you wash them? And then the reaction was, yeah, but we don't have a kitchen in the school, we can't start cleaning all that. And there was a complete disconnect between what I think the rest of the world is doing at any school where you have plates that need to be cleaned, and what I experienced in North America. So they were working towards a solution which was better than what they had, but it was certainly not where you should end up. And then, as Camina was just saying, sitting in the kitchen in Uganda, and yeah, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people are switching into like compostable cutlery and all this stuff, and at the end of the day, compostable waste is still waste. And there was a quiz on CNN, I think, that they were talking about the impact of different changes, and they found that reducing waste is it sort of saves more greenhouse gas than if you compost and you turn vegan combined, and so, or not vegan, plant-based diet, and so the idea, I think waste, just generating that waste is already too late. It doesn't matter what kind it is. After that, it's really just almost low semantics, because one option is slightly better than the other, but once you generate the waste, it's all very bad. Alex, you recently moved to Ottawa from the Netherlands, and so I have two quick questions. How are you adjusting to our winter? Because I'm getting pictures from Europe and it's all sunny. And the second is, what are some of the differences that you have noticed between Canada and Europe in terms of how we're fighting climate and waste?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange start. I wish I could turn around my camera, because it's heavily snowing right now, just behind the screen of my MacBook. I arrived here in November and then had first 2 weeks of quarantine. And I think the moment I got out, we went from the one lockdown in the other. Some are called orange and some are red. But basically, I'm kept mostly indoors, either by the winter or by the COVID restrictions. It's a strange start in a new country. It's not easy to meet new people, etc., as I've done in other countries where I've lived in the past. At the same time, it's a country where Dutch people feel very much at home. There's a long-standing bond between the Canadians and the Netherlands, partly explained by the Canadians liberating us in the Second World War. After that, there's been a lot of migration, so there's a lot of sympathy back and forth. I think when I look at the climate challenges, it's a bit like COVID. We're all in this together. We worldwide have to change, all of us. In both countries, you have governments that take this much more seriously than the governments have done in the past. I'm not going to make a race between the countries, which one is going faster than the other. But let's say in the Netherlands, we are really stepping up now after having been, I think we were too slow, also compared to other EU countries. We were maybe a bit lazy because we were the only gas exporting country in the EU. So we were so used to have, our own cheap energy. But in the past few years, and the government that just ended a couple of weeks ago, they've really stepped up their act. We're going to get rid of gas now. We're going to stop the use of coal. We're going to tax planes. We're rapidly building windmills all over in the North Sea. As an environmentalist, I always say it's not enough. We should go faster. But as a former diplomat looking at what countries are doing, I must say I'm impressed that we, having been so slow first, that we're really stepping up now, and let's say the acceleration is really fast. So we have to keep up that momentum. And here in Canada, I mean, like the Netherlands, as a fossil fuel exporting country, it puts you in a strange position, because you have, with all the tar sands, etc. You have, of course, huge challenges. You have to think about, you can just say, okay, we're going to be clean and we're going to stop all this, which I would love to see, but you need a more structural solution than just cutting that. You have to think about, jobs, economy. It's a massive job to really transform the economy, and you should not look only through the climate lens, but as a whole society. And that is this. You'll find some of that back in, let's say, the Green New Deal, as the EU is working on it now, as the US is discussing it. You find elements of that also in Canada. So I think both countries are working with a lot of challenges. Both countries work together in many fields. We learn from each other. We help from each other. And it's so we're in this for the next few decades, and I think that the latest trend is from certainly the last year, and especially last few months, is that more and more countries are looking at what should we do the coming 5 or 10 years, because it was so easy for a government to say by 2050 we're going to behave ourselves.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, where do we really want to be? In the Netherlands, that was speeded up by a decision of the Supreme Court after there was a legal sue. There was an NGO called Organa that sued our government and was saying what you are doing is not what you're supposed to do as a government. And they refer to human rights and all kinds of other laws. And they managed to win that. So it was the Supreme Court that told our government to step up or act, and they did.
Yeah, it's funny because you talk about race, and it's something that comes up a lot in COVID, like who is the fastest country in terms of vaccination, and I always find that strange because it's not a race. It's at the end of the day we need to go to the finish line, and unless we all get to that finish line, nobody gets to that finish line, because
exactly.
I think what we're learning from COVID is that the crisis anywhere is a crisis everywhere, and so this is where I see the need for collaboration. And on that note, I want to play a video from Marie-Claire, who's also a formal guest here, that just talk about this issue. So I'll play that.
But I think what is very important is also to connecting the different sectors. So it's not only possible to change, for example, if you do one sector at a university, but there is also the policy level, and just because there was one comment on policies, one question on policies which are which actually would be there, but they're not implemented. And I think this is so important, because if we have in politics is fast changing, and the university, you implement some things, but then they're not going anywhere. So it's very important to hold people accountable, and this also needs to be done through cross-sector sectoral agreements, because no sector alone can get it done. So even if we focus on the university and try to improve them, this is never going to be enough, and we have to watch out to build solid partnerships and networks.
So Marie-Claire was making the point of how important it is for all sectors of society to tackle the climate and waste crisis. And Camina, as a business owner and founder of BIPOC, can you speak to the responsibility and the role of business, as well as the structure that needs to be put in place sort of to push business to do more?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think what she was saying, basically, that, businesses and institutions don't work or, produce in a bubble. And so that you really need that kind of cross-sector collaboration. And I think in business, specifically when I'm thinking about my work that I do with BIPOC, is that businesses are changing if there's an economic incentive, they can start making money. You're local businesses, but people try to do the little changes they can, but there's always that bottom line that you're thinking of. And so I think that's an incentive. Government policies, if you have certain things you can or cannot do, hold businesses accountable as well. And just consumer demand, if consumers are purchasing things that they know full well have been used, exploitative labor or have exploited the environment, then it's basically telling businesses that that's okay. Your profit margin can be that big while you're exploiting these other resources, because consumers are not batting an eye at it. And so I think that the responsibility and that accountability comes from all these different directions. I do think that things are changing a little bit. I think consumers, I hope at least, are becoming more conscious. Especially recently I've been seeing a lot of people call out companies for greenwashing, or just in diversity in general. And so I think it's about educating consumers, so that they can make conscious decisions about how they're consuming, and then also holding business responsible through government policy, and making sure that things are actually followed through, and not just writing policy for the sake of writing policy. And I think that as on myself an individual level, it's voting for representatives and politicians that are advancing things that you believe are right. And so it's definitely tricky about who's more responsible. And I think we're all we're all equally responsible, but the impact that businesses can have, just because they're hiring maybe hundreds, my business is 2-3 people, or it can be hundreds of thousands of people, and so they're really connected to the livelihoods of people, and globally, they're all those transnational organizations. And so the impact that they can have if they change their business model to something more sustainable is exponential, for like the livelihoods of different communities, for the environment, for everything. And so, yeah, I think that like in general, I think that businesses are making that shift. So, and we've seen now recently, there's many models that work and you can be sustainable and still make profit and benefit the environment. And so there's like that false idea that you can't do all those things. So I think we're like deconstructing that slowly in business. But yeah, we're getting there.
I'm curious, how was your experience starting a new business? What was all of this in mind, trying to be sustainable, whether economically, social, and environmentally, and at the same time, trying to be financially viable to make sure that your livelihood and your employers, our employees are also having, proper environment and proper pay, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because it's always been at the heart of my business for it to be most like socially and environmentally responsible. And so I started off with that, but I definitely had that apprehension of, people won't want to pay more, or people won't like the packaging if it's, not as maybe pretty as a plastic bag, or, those ethylene bags. And so often actually in my Instagram stories, I would just ask, I was like, hey, I want to change into compostable bags. Would you pay an extra $1 per product? And that way I can have compostable bags. I can have all my paper be printed on like recycled paper that's like recyclable, but also made from recycled post-consumer material. All those little changes, or hey, I'm actually in this area. I can actually bike to meet you. If you just meet me at this metro station, would you be available? Or if I'm actually in the area and I'll do it with Jean-Marie Course that I have to go around. And so all those little decisions, and through those Instagram stories and talking to people, I realized that people were actually really excited about the opportunity. They're like, yes, for sure, we'd pay that little extra $1 more. To have things be, as zero waste as possible, or to meet me. I've biked to like Longueuil and like La Salle, and so they actually ended up adding value because you have to meet customers. It builds those relationships, and then people see that you actually care about. It adds value to the product in itself because people know that it's respecting the environment as much as possible. And even for me as a business owner, it made sense. I was cutting out head wraps, which are like 2 meters by 0.5 meter, but I had always like this little extra chunk of fabric. I was like, what can I do with this? And then I was like, I can make scrunchies with this little extra bit. And so I would make scrunchies, and the scrunchies sold incredibly. And now they're a permanent part of the collection. And it was just because I just didn't want to waste that little extra bit of fabric. And so economically it was really viable, but also environmentally as well. And now it's even gotten to the point where like the little waste from the scrunchies is just this small. One of my seamstresses recycles that waste into artwork. And so I think as a business owner, it's just changing your mindset. They're realizing that sustainable does not mean not economically viable. And you'll be all the better for it, like both your customers and you feel just better about it in general.
Yeah. Alex, so there's a lot of, these days, a lot of announcement from governments all over the world, including Canada and Montreal and Quebec, about plans to fight the climate crisis that have a deadline of 2030 or a timeline of 2030. And one of the things that come up is that, there's a couple of things. One is that we have heard this before, like this is not the first time governments talk about the climate crisis. There's a lot of credibility issues that happen. And the other is that the timeline is a little further than what the IPCC is saying, that if we continue emitting at the trend that we are now, our carbon budget would stop at would be depleted at 2027. So it's too late. So I guess, have we given up on 1.5 degrees C is my question, is my first question. Second question is, how can we and people listening hold governments more accountable and try to improve the sense of urgency and sort of raise the level of ambition?
Yeah, I don't. Let me first say I get so enthusiastic when I hear Camina talk about how exciting it can be to both develop a business and be sustainable and do the right things, and that is I love those kind of stories. So that was great to listen to. I think you can't say anybody has given up on the 1.5 degrees, but you can say, yes, we have been too late. We should have started in the 1990s, and it would have been so much easier then. And we postponed until climate change became so visible that you really have to be blind not to see it. I mean, just look at Texas today, and next week we will have another example somewhere in the world. So now we are in the phase after 2015 was a highlight. We agreed on the SDGs and we agreed on the Paris Agreement and a whole bunch of other agreements that were good for the planet. But then I think we lost again a few years. I think that has a lot to do with the worldwide mood when the most powerful country in the world was led by a government that thought that climate change was a complete hoax. So now that our southern neighbor is back on track and quite enthusiastically and actually willing to lead, that gives a new impetus. Also looking at in November this year when the COP conference of parties number 26 will come together in Glasgow, where each country really has to explain what are you exactly going to do to get here. I think that is that's a positive development on this 10-year time frame, whereas we're running out of time in 2027. Well, it's not that if we go through the 1.5 degrees that all is lost. It is of course we should try to stay below 1.5 and preferably even lower, but still, let's say a 3-degree warmer world is a complete nightmare, but a 4-degree world is even a worse nightmare. So anything you can do to slow it down remains relevant. I think setting targets on a 10-year time frame is okay compared to what it used to be when countries were talking about 2050, because then you could promise all kinds of stuff and then leave it to the next government and next government. When you talk about a 10-year time frame, you cannot get away with saying we will reduce our emissions by so many percent in 2030, and for the next 9 years or 8 years we're not going to do anything, and then it's up to the government in the last year. You can't get away with that lie. So I think countries are becoming more serious. You see the EU really stepping up, getting more ambitious. You see individual EU countries getting more ambitious. You see all kinds of countries in the non-Western world that are really giving the right example. Let's say a country like Bhutan is doing so much better than practically any other country in the world, or Costa Rica has been doing quite well. On holding countries accountable, I agree very much with all the examples that Camina gave. I also think that the young generation is the one that is now holding the older generation accountable. Greta Thunberg, but also youth leaders from all kinds of other countries in the world, from Uganda to wherever, are really stepping up their act, and they have been the ones that kept the issue on the map when attention was lost a bit in the past few years. Working on the media, so using social media, convince people about what's going on, invest in education, tell people what climate change really is. There's so much more education needed. We need research and more data. And ultimately, it is about your voice as a citizen. When we unite all the citizens, and when we vote for the right parties with the right policies, then we can really make a change. And as the last thing, referring again to what Camina said, also individual choices. So if only 5% in a population are no longer eating meat, but they go for alternative meat, or they don't buy milk anymore, but they buy soy milk or oat milk. If it's only 5% of the population, you already change the whole economy of those products. You are already influential because you are a group that the companies can't ignore. So with small steps that you can take yourself, you can make a change. Especially if you do it with other people together. I think the one that I just mentioned on milk is interesting. Seeing if you're now in a supermarket, you see so much, both in Canada as well as in the Netherlands, you see so many alternative milk products compared to just 3 or 5 years ago. And that means there's less cows, they produce less methane, that there's less abuse of animals, and that we took another small step towards a better, more sustainable and a more fair world.
Yeah. So first, I would like to give a quick reminder to people listening to write their questions. Samita is going to join us in about 4 minutes to moderate those questions. So I guess on that point about individual choices, there's a big debate on the different responsibilities of industry and governments versus the role of individuals. And during the last Fireside Chat, Erline, who I see also in the audience, has weighed into that debate. So I'm going to play that video, and then I'm going to get back.
So I very much agree that companies also have a very big responsibility, because when they can make bigger changes and therefore have a big impact, that's of course wonderful. At the same time, I believe that it's not more important than the individual aspects, because companies are made up of people. So what I believe is that when people get inspired to live more environmentally friendly at home, and they get into the habit of doing so, and they become aware how important it is, when they then go to, as an employee or as a boss, to that company, then they will take this mindset with them. Because I've noticed that as well during my challenge. As soon as I saw things at home, for example, how to be able to separate my waste, when I then saw at work that I wasn't able to separate my waste, that felt really uncomfortable. So when we support people to live more environmentally friendly at home, I also believe that it's more likely that things change in companies.
Camina, I'm wondering if you would weigh in on that, given your work to raise awareness at the grassroots level.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that when it comes down to what she's saying, like that, every business, every institution is broken down into the micro level of humans, of an individual, and that individual, if they are equipped with the proper education, and they have created those habits and those actions themselves, and have discussed with their peers, and that becomes a habit and becomes a lifestyle, that they will bring that into their workplace, or they'll bring that into their home and their family and their communities. I definitely don't think it takes away from the importance of how big of an impact that governments and how big of an impact businesses can have, but on the individual level, that there's a lot of power in that, in when individuals get together and form a collective. It makes me think also a lot like when I was younger. So I actually petitioned to get compost started at my high school. And we actually ended up a compost system. It was a lot of work. I ended up just me hauling up the compost every single day, but we had a little compost system outside. And then when I had my first job working at a grocery store at Sobeys in Peterborough, Ontario, they were recycling boxes. And grocery stores get thousands of cardboard boxes, and they were not being recycled. And so after about a year of working there, it physically pained me, because I had put in so much energy, and I was just so used to a certain way at school. That we were doing things, that I ended up talking to my manager of my department, who ended up talking to the manager of the grocery store, and we ended up getting recycling implemented at the Sobeys. I don't know if it's still there now. It was like 8 years ago. But at the time I was working there for the rest of the 4 years, and so it really showed the importance of building that system of education. That even I'm trying to think back in elementary school, if we even talked about climate change or environmental sustainability, and I don't think so, and I'm hoping that it is more included in curriculum now. But to educate a certain generation, they will bring those values, that value system, into their work, and they'll be able to change institutions. If we're talking about the grassroots way, kind of from the bottom up, and so not erasing top-down efforts of working with an institution to make big changes, systemic changes, but also there's a lot of power in terms of what Alex is saying. It's also from the bottom up, from young leaders who are really setting the example, and who are not making making people have we're all very busy, and it's easy to get things lost in our priorities. But then you have those people who lead communities that remind people that these are a priority for everybody. The climate crisis is something that's affecting everybody, and those little individuals can make a big change, community, locally and globally.
Hi everyone, that was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
And we had some comments from the audience, actually. So just commenting on what you guys were saying, that it's an interesting way to look at the concept of developed country, from what you said, Camina. Also, compostable waste is still waste. That's very interesting, because sometimes we use this as an excuse, to just say, all right, we're going to change to compostable waste because it's just so much easier, but actually it's still very much waste. So that was interesting. And we also had a question from Erlin. So Camina, do you have a picture of your reuse of the fabric? Because it sounded interesting. So I don't know if you have something to show us.
I do. You have like 5 seconds for you to jump at it. I have whole bags of like ends of fabric that I incorporate into either new items, like I have full wardrobe back now. I did a jacket and added patches onto it. Or you can also just check fabric.ca, see your beautiful line of scrunchies that all match the hair they are the ends of those. So yeah, maybe I can wait for another question and I'll get some examples if you'd like.
Can you guys my problem is going is a bit of strange voice, but maybe you want to lower your volume.
Maybe you can mute, unmute, just to see if it works.
It's always happens, so we power through.
Yes. All right, but thank you. So yeah, we'll go check out on Urban Rapper for sure. Erlin also has a question for Alexander. So you have mentioned that it is these days so obvious that climate change is happening. Do you have experience with how we can be reach or inform people who don't realize this yet?
Well, one of the things that I do is I'm quite active on social media, and I try to reach as many as possible people with this message. I have 2 different accounts. One is the one that's mentioned here. That's the biggest one. It's my own account, where I used to speak only about climate change and related kind of planetary challenges. But I found that I was too much preaching to the converted, and we were just in one circle talking to each other. So what I did on that account is that I made it much more accessible, more popular. So you'll see lots of videos of cats and dogs doing funny things, etc. And then I include also messages about what's happening to our planet, that we should be worried about it. But I also try to bring in a lot of positive news. A lot of it is about showing the beauty of our planet, how you can appreciate it by going out in nature, or by showing pictures of spectacular nature, and also about what you can do as an individual. Now, the other account is Planetary Security. It's at planetary_sec, from the days that we had to keep our names as short as possible on Twitter. That is much more focused on the content. So how is our changing planet, the biodiversity loss and climate change, how is that impacting our human security and justice and international security? So that's much more focused on content. And now the interesting thing is that the second account is now growing faster than the first account, where I spend more time on. So I still do something wrong. So that's what I do to convince people. I sometimes get bombarded with hate mail from semi-professional or really professional climate deniers. I never know where the money comes from, but I think looking at the fossil fuel industry is a good start. Those people will never be convinced. It's very sad for them, but that's it, because they have children too that have to live on this planet. But there's a huge group of people that simply don't know. They've fallen for the trap that was set by the fossil fuel industry of creating confusion, as if scientists do not agree on climate change, as if climate change is happening all the time, as if this is just weather. And these people are just not educated well enough to know how bad the situation is and to know that we can actually solve it. This is a solvable crisis. We can do this. And for that group of people, I hope to convince those people, and sometimes they write to me that I managed to do that, and that makes me very happy, to get those people on board and tell them, hey guys, this is the real story. And so that's one of the ways that I'm working. I mean, I also do a lot before COVID and after COVID, I hope. I work a lot as a public speaker. But then generally the audience is already kind of on your side. So you need less convincing. So I think social media is in that aspect an interesting step.
Actually, I wanted to build on that a little bit. So if Camina, if your mic is working again, how do you see with COVID, now we all had to brush on our social media skills and virtual communication because of COVID, and how do you foresee this affecting our ability to expand beyond our bubbles? So what are the lasting challenges and opportunities you might see?
Definitely. So are we good for the voice? You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Technology. It's super interesting because for me, social media is not changing really. So it's another way that humans can collaborate. It's another way that we can connect with people. And yes, over larger distances and much faster. But that comes with its pros and cons. I think not to have, a technologically deterministic view of social media. But so it's, it's not going to affect the outcome of how determined humans are to actually combat this crisis, but it can be used as a tool to be able to, collaborate, to mobilize, to educate. And so I think now people are seeing the potential that social media has to, mobilize groups from across different continents to share information, knowledge exchange, share resources. And also just hold people accountable as well. Not that cancel culture is great, but just that idea of, the people now have a platform that they can use to voice their opinion is great in terms of holding people accountable and showing what consumers are demanding and what kind of content is most favorable. But it also comes with, I think, its downside in terms of social media is often we are in our little bubbles, because of algorithms and the way that social media is architecturally set up. Often you are put into groups of people that share the same views as you, that won't contest kind of your ideas and won't expose you to new ideas. And so it is also troubling that you have exponential capacity to collaborate and to connect with other people, but there are systems in social media that make it that you are kind of isolated in certain communities. Even just thinking of that popular example of you search climate change depending on where you are in the world. And what you usually look up in your browser, Google will give you different answers. Climate change is a hoax, or climate change is, inevitable, or whatever the answer will be. And so I think to not be naive also about social media and structurally how it affects the way humans collaborate and connect with each other. And, we learn in our communication classes that, fake news will travel just as fast. And it's how do people now know what is truthful, what is not truthful, kind of like Alex was saying, in terms of that misinformation. And so I think there's a whole educational process that has to happen too in social media. How can you use it productively, actively, be able to decipher what's, fake news from real news, and to not use it just as a consumer. I think sometimes social media is seen as you just go on Instagram and you scroll and, you double tap a few things. But I don't think that's where the potential lies in social media. It's really using social media as something productive, and not so much as a consumption kind of perspective. And so, you're, embarking on social media to create connections, to have collaborations, to learn something new or sign a petition or, whatever it is, or watch, something interesting and informing yourself about a global issue. And so, not that social media in itself are going to change things if the way we use social media and the way we engage with each other on social media doesn't change too. And I think that it's been scary for me just, embarking on social media. Sometimes you are afraid of saying something that you think people will misinterpret. Things go so fast, you don't have time to explain. And often people forget it's humans sometimes that they're talking to, and they'll say things maybe that they wouldn't necessarily said to face. And so I think that we're coming with a whole new way of approaching communication online, and exponentially quick because of COVID, and that's where all of, most of the communication is happening. But then, there's all these new platforms that have come out. Even StreamYard, this is my second time using it. There's all these other like live streaming platforms and other ways to engage with audiences and connect and share information that are added value that you couldn't even do, let's say, in a live event. You couldn't just like share your screen or have a chat going on the side at the same time. So there's a lot of benefits to this kind of digital communication as well, but just to use it wisely and not naively, for sure.
It's funny because when you talk about collaboration, I see Erline is in the comments now, and she was a formal. She was one of the guests. She was a guest of the last Fireside Chat, and part of me just wished that she could just jump in and join us in the screen after talking. Alex, how was your experience with live events? Because I remember we were chatting about sort of our conflicting passions. I say you love to travel and you love to do public speaking, which has a lot of travel, and same thing. You're trying to fight the climate crisis, and I relate to this quite a lot because I'm also an aerospace engineer, and I talk a lot about fighting the climate crisis. But I've also been playing with paper airplanes since I was 5, so it is also my passion. And so how do you reconcile all of these things? You're muted as well, Alex.
There I am again. I was muting it to keep the sound better. I think in a way what we've done in the past year now, all of us together, in being so active on all these platforms, has shown to the world that you can work from home in all kinds of jobs where we thought that you couldn't do it. You can do conferences without traveling, and so it has shown us a lot. On the other hand, I think when the crisis is over and we can fly again, we will start to travel more, because you miss the kind of human interaction that you normally have when you have a conference, that you sit together in the coffee corner, etc., and you can exchange things. So I don't think this will replace everything the way that we worked in the past, but we won't forget about this either. So I think you'll see in the future more kind of mix between this way of working of the past year and the way we did in the past. For me, I normally work mostly in Europe and in North America, although I do work in places as far away as Hong Kong or Costa Rica or something. But what I plan to do is I always try to reduce my travel, but it's part of the job that I do. So what I'm aiming for in the future is to use my personal carbon budget for transatlantic flights. But once I'm on the other side, stay there as long as possible, and then in Europe only travel by train, or if needed by car, but at least by let's say non-flying, and the same in North America. Just take a few extra days to take a car. Trains are so badly organized here that you have to go by car unless you stay on the East Coast, I think. But driving in a car is so much less than the waste you produce with flying. But I want to make a note here. It is in the interest of the fossil fuel industry that want to keep the system as it is, to make debates like we do here in pinpointing too much at each other. We have to keep ourselves and each other accountable for the kind of behavior that we do, but we don't solve the climate change problem by all say we are not flying. It's a fraction of the whole story. It's relevant. All of them are relevant. But we ultimately need a much more a system change that should come from the government. So we as individuals should influence our governments that we really move towards a completely different way how we organize our society. And part of that is to reduce the absurd, huge influence that companies have, whose only aim it is to make more profit, and how they influence the policies that are made for us. So I'm the first one to look at myself in my own behavior, and it is relevant, and I will never deny that. But we should all be aware not to make the mistake that we are only focusing on each other and that we forget about the bigger system that's behind here.